to quickly introduce this next panel. It's really the sponsor perspective on advancements in barriers in the Canadian clinical trial environment. This session actually will be chaired by Michel Duong. Mike likes to say that his day job is as head of innovation at Hoffman-La, Roche, but Michel is the chair also of the board of CPIN, an organization that he co-founded as well. Another shout out to Michel again is that he's been a co-chair of this conference and very instrumental in the development of the agenda since inception. Michel has been with us for 8 conferences. He's deeply experienced in personalized healthcare and has been an invaluable guide and resource to many. This is somebody I deeply admire, and we're very pleased to welcome Michel to chair this session.
Thank you so much. That was such a nice introduction. I'm blushing now. Thank you for that, Anne-Marie. Before we go to the panel, which I'm going to actually ask for them to introduce themselves, because there's really no way I can do them justice in terms of talking about all their experience. Before we go there, just wanted to talk a little bit about this panel and sort of tee it up, set it up. It's going to be very much it's going to be an informal conversation. So again, as Anne-Marie had said at the beginning of the conference, we are very much inviting you to step up and ask questions. It's titled The Sponsor's Perspective, but we pulled a little bit of an audible here. It is not just the sponsor's perspective. We're bringing in multiple perspectives, as you'll see from the introductions. What we wanted to do, let me take a step back and say this is my 8th year helping co-chair this conference, and I'm honored every year I get re-invited to come back, because it's an opportunity for me to come back into the clinical trial space and sort of see the evolution, the progression, the activity, and the actions that have taken place in this space. I once upon a time I used to work in this space, and that was one of the reasons why I was invited to come and co-chair this conference way back when. I've since moved on and moved out of this space and no longer work in this space, but I get to see the amazing progress. And we talk about sort of like all the problems that we have here, but there have been massive advancements. Maybe not like quantum leaps in advancements for sure. I think Rebecca talked about like we need to transform this space for sure, but there have been evolution in this space, and I get really excited to see that. And I think part of that, especially at this conference, is seeing sort of this action-orientedness of this audience. And the audience has grown, and it continues to grow, and it continues to inspire more work, more collaborations within this country. And that's what we wanted to talk about in this panel is, let's identify some of the barriers that we're trying to achieve, but let's talk about the solutions that, we in our different roles and from our different perspectives, let's talk about what are the advancements. What are we doing today that's going to bring more clinical trials to Canada, more investments into clinical trials in Canada? Because we know clinical trials are an important aspect of care for patients. They're also, as we saw from Ritu, who I don't think is here anymore, but her presentation this morning, that they are also an important aspect for economic development for our country. So there is extreme importance of clinical trials and the investments that we bring into Canada from that perspective. So let's talk about how we're advancing that conversation and what we're doing from that perspective. So I'm going to stop there with my little tee up. I'm going to actually go to our online participants first, and then we'll go into the people in-house. So I'm going to start with Judy, and if I can ask you, in your introductions, please introduce yourself and then speak a little bit about the perspective that you're bringing from the organization that you're a part of, and what it is that you do within the clinical trial ecosystem, so that everybody here sort of gets a frame of reference. And while they're introducing themselves, think about the questions that you want to ask with respect to our guests. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you very much, Michel. So hi everybody, I'm really happy to be here. I'm Judy Needham. I am retired. Can you hear me okay? Perfect, okay. I am, in terms of my role in research, I'm on the patient and caregiver side of the house. I am retired from a career in corporate marketing. A little bit about the role or roles that I play. I am very much engaged with the Canadian Cancer Trials Group, where I wear a couple of hats. I chair the Patient Representative Committee there, and I'm a member of the Strategic Executive Advisory Council. A little bit of responsibilities in 3CTN, where I sit on the Scientific Advisory Board, and delighted to be working with the Canadian Cancer Society in the newly founded Canadian Patient Engagement Community of Practice that they're the executive sponsor for, and also some engagement in their patient and caregiver forums. And a little bit of international responsibilities with the Breast International Group. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Armstrong.
Hi everybody, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and my name is Armstrong Murira. I am the CEO and co-founder of a Montreal-based startup called Simmunome AI, and we use generative AI to model biological systems. And I'll tell you a bit more about that. By background, I'm an immunologist, and that was my pathway into computational biology, which then led into machine learning research in the space of life sciences. And at the heart of it, I was always baffled by the progress that humanity has made in so many areas, but in my mind and in my lens during grad school, I saw that with respect to healthcare, and particularly in the cases of health and disease, there was so much that still needed to be done. There was so much that remained intractable. Now, my original desire was to increase the efficiency in clinical trials, which not only cost an exorbitant amount of money and take really long with those success rates, but repeatedly we find that patients are underrepresented, patient diversity is underrepresented during clinical trials. And I wanted to get to a point where we understood what the impact was of that from a scientific deep tech perspective. Now, what we do at Simmunome is we build computational models for simulating disease progression and impact of therapeutic or preventative intervention. So the idea is to be able to simulate a clinical trial outcome and to understand A, why it works, why it doesn't work, and for whom it works and for whom it doesn't work. The idea is to better understand the patients that should be recruited into clinical trials and those that shouldn't be recruited to certain clinical trials, and to also increase the level of confidence and trust that the patient community has in the interventions that they use and the interventions that they are signed on to. And I'll stop there and pass the mic.
Hello everybody, my name is Bruno. I'm the medical lead for the pipeline at GSK Canada. So my role entitles that I'm sort of like core.
Judy and Armstrong, can we ask that you mute your mic just while you're not speaking, because we're getting some feedback. Thank you.
Perfect. I'm sort of the quarterback from trial sessions with the global teams at GSK, clinical trials operations here in Canada with my clinical operations colleagues, up to the notice of compliance and reimbursement. So I deal with all of that, and all pre-NOC, so notice of compliance, pre-indication assets. And in terms of where we fit in the ecosystems, in terms of pharmaceutical industry, I think we have a responsibility to bring the new assets of our pipeline, every single one of them. Some of the companies have less, some have more, but I think it only takes one to be responsible to bring it to Canadian patients. And I know, Rebecca, you used the word responsible. I think I feel responsible to bring assets to the Canadian environment, and that's very important. It's not a nice to have, it's not a maybe I'll get to it. We are responsible to work with all you guys to bring new innovation medicine to patients. So in a nutshell, I will stop there, but I'm representing the pharmaceutical segment.
Bruno's mic is definitely working. There you go. My name's Oliver. I'm a director of engagement, partnership, and strategic initiatives at the Catalis Clinical Trials Quebec. So basically, Catalis has been created back in 2017 during the first SQSV, Stratégie québécoise des sciences de la vie, Quebec Life Science Strategy, with the governmental mandate to optimize the clinical trial ecosystem in Quebec in order to attract more trials in our province. So we're not doing that on our own, we're not doing that alone, we're basically together a large network of collaborators that includes 25 healthcare institutions and their research department, 40 patient groups, patient associations, patient partners. We have 20 industry members that are part of our network, and the way we work is that we create advisory committee that are entrepreneurial and empowered by our governmental mandate to identify, discuss current barriers, challenges, red tape, roadblocks, administrative delays, and then co-create solutions to overcome those barriers in a functioning manner, and then pilot them for a while. And once the quality of those programs has been shown, the MSSS, the Ministry of Health and Social Services in Quebec, is then pushing this back to the healthcare system as a standard practice. So this allows our Quebec clinical trial ecosystem to be agile, to work at a fast pace, and to really create solutions in a consensus manner with all those stakeholders to do one thing, is optimize the way trials are conducted in Quebec, accelerate approval time, make sure that the patient referral and recruitment is looking at innovative ways to meet its target. And at the end of the day, that expertise needs to be shown to the world in order to attract more trials to Canada, in partnership with our Canadian CEOs at the industry level, to say that Canada, Quebec is the right place to hold modern trials.
Thank you. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci de votre participation. My name is Stephan Michel. I'm representing the CRO IQVIA. I'm an associate director for the patient and site solution team. So my day-to-day job is to work closely with the sites that have a specific partnership with IQVIA, actually across Canada and a little bit in the US as well. And I have more than 20 years experience in clinical research as a CRA, firstly working directly with PIs and sites, and then as a clinical lead and a project manager. And nowadays I'm working hand in hand with our partner sites, actually at partnership level, to try to find new opportunities of clinical trials for them, and to try to bring them another level of support, actually, when they are facing some challenges in their current clinical trials. My role is today here is actually to understand what are the main challenges actually to bring clinical trials in Canada. I think there is a lot of misperceptions still from the industry as well. So in terms of the timeliness for clinical trials to be implemented in Canada, in terms of the kind of resources that we can put in place to support the sites. So I think it's really beneficial to have a panel like today, because we are representative of the industry. We are working hand in hand with the sponsors. We are working hand in hand with you, actually, with some of you in the room today who are working directly with the patients, in close contact with the site as well. And Catalis will also be definitively locally a great platform for us, actually, to extend our network and to understand how we can play a role between what's happening at the site level and what is happening in this really greatly changing landscape in Quebec with law number 5, with the implementation of Santé Québec as well. We are in a definitively moving landscape as well. So it would be interesting to hear firstly from you, actually, to see what are your needs, and most importantly, how the industry can help you more, actually, to bring those studies in.
Great, thank you for that. So you've heard from the introductions, the different perspectives that we're trying to bring to this conversation. And the conversation is about barriers, but more focused on the advancements that we're seeing today, and hopefully that will bring in the near future to bring clinical trials to Canada. Again, I'll invite you to line up at the microphone to ask some questions, but maybe we'll start. So we've started talking a little bit about sort of some of these challenges to clinical trials. I'd love to maybe understand from each one of you, maybe more specific for the conversation into Canada, like what are, in your minds, from your perspective, from your specific role in this ecosystem, what do you think is the number one or number two challenge specific to Canada? So specific to bringing these trials here, what challenges are you faced with? Again, I'm going to go to online first, so we'll start with Judy.
Thank you very much, Michel. So, we have conversations regarding patient centricity in research and clinical trials, and this agenda, this conference agenda is one of the best places that I'm aware of that encourages and provides a space like this for these kinds of conversations. And, the name of the conference is the 8th Annual Patient-Centered Approach to Clinical Trials. And so, along with that, I look at the question we have, what needs to be done to create a clinical trial environment that meets the needs of patients in Canada? So, we've come a long ways in engaging patients in the development of clinical trials. Patients are engaged on very much so now in Canada in trials as each trial is being developed and making sure the design meets patient needs, etc. But let's back up a bit and take a broader look than the individual clinical trials that we have in Canada. There are gaps in patient engagement at a strategic level. Are patients being engaged in strategic planning to identify the research topics that patients view as being the most important to them? Not as the sole, but only as one input into the strategic planning exercises that happen within organizations and trial sponsors and institutions across Canada. And I guess this makes me think, is there a link between low approval and overarching strategic agendas that maybe aren't taking into consideration, patients' priorities in what those research topics are? And so I guess I'm curious as we go around the table here to know generally from my fellow panelists and others what patient engagement looks like in this area. Are we indeed in Canada doing a good job of engaging patients and finding out what their needs as we set our strategic agendas, or is there an opportunity here for us to be bridging this gap? So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Judy. Maybe instead of going in direct order, maybe I'll just throw it out to the panelists to see if anybody can address Judy's question about patient engagement. Are we doing anything about patient engagement in clinical trials?
I think the landscape in that area evolved a lot in the past, the last decade as well. There have been a lot of initiatives that have been put in place by the industry. Can you maybe welcome Judy?
Judy, can we ask that you just mute your mic again? Thank you, sorry.
So there have been a lot of initiatives put in place as well. We want to hear more. I think we were working a lot in silo before as well. And in the past 5 to 10 years, we tried to break a little bit those silo as well to bring, as we can hear at the conference today, the perspective of the patients themselves, the patients advocacy group, the patient's voice working from the sites as well. So that's what is really important for us as a CRO, and I think as a sponsor as well, is to really hear from the sites what are the challenges faced by the patients, to integrate them when we design our protocol as well. So that's very important as well. diversity, as one of the panelists was saying as well, has become more and more important as well. So it's we are realizing that those challenges needs to be taken in account as well. Now, are we doing what is necessary actually to bring up the patient engagement? There's definitively room to do more actually, and I think that's where this type of conferences is really useful as well, because it's not only useful for the patients themselves as well, but it's useful for the industry to make sure that everyone is educated at the right level in terms of putting in place some clinical trials in Canada. And to try to bring this education will allow us, when as a CRO we discuss with sponsors, or when sponsors are discussing directly with sites, to break those misperceptions that can prevent clinical trials to be implemented in Canada.
I may add a few words looking at the patient perspective on the patient group side of things. Patient engagement programs in numerous patient associations are of world class, really. When it comes to patient awareness and educational programs, they do take the efforts to bring awareness to their patient communities about the importance of research and clinical trials in order to break the stigmas, making sure proactively that clinical trials are known ahead of the actual clinical need in the patient journey, and then they're providing tools and services to facilitate sometimes identification or a navigator service. Some patient organizations in therapeutic areas have their own navigator service, but that brings a gap that Judy was mentioning. It is not equally spread out in the ecosystem. Unfortunately, depending on your diagnosis, you may have that world-class patient group working for you towards engagement in clinical trials, but otherwise, if you're not fortunate enough to have a patient association to rely on for those priorities in your patient journey, you'll have to rely on something else to help you engage. And this is why I think as an ecosystem, we have to make sure we come with solutions to make sure that nobody's left out in terms of being educated and bringing awareness to the whole population, so that engagement is not necessarily a box to be ticked, but it's known in our DNA to be something we're considering at all times during patient journey. So there's gaps, but it is known, and occasions like today are great to fill those gaps.
And if I may, I'm sorry to interrupt as well, but I think it's really important what you said, because when I was mentioning education at industry level as well, yes, we do have a role to educate the industries about the benefit to bring clinical trials in Canada as well. But there is an education effort to be done towards patients as well, and that's the role that we can all play actually, just to make sure that the general public is well aware of what is a clinical trial, what are the benefits of a clinical trial actually, and just not maybe sticking into some misperceptions that the patients themselves may have as well. So, and I think that, the industry can certainly support the sites better for that as well, by putting in place some education material, some forums, some conference where the patients can be involved as well, just to come back to the basics basically, and make sure that the patient understand well what option can represent a clinical trial for them.
I agree with the educational piece for sure, but I think we need to partner with patient advocacy groups. We need to do more than your traditional just give a piece, a one-pager, and say, please come into our trial. Right? I think there's more to be done than that. From my perspective, there's two ways I see this. The first one is patient engagement at clinical trial inception level. I think Barry's a good example. He sits on our patient global council, which takes input from patients to design clinical trials. Now, does that mean that clinical trials are all of a sudden going to be really simple to implement, less visit and less everything? No, because regulatory and reimbursement landscape is as such. I was just talking to our patient advocate at our table, Andrew, and I said to him, if the regulatory agency changes overnight, it's going to take, and I don't know if you agree with that, but the pharmaceutical industry will change in a week and adapt to what is needed. And now we're not changing because the regulatory bodies are exiging, what's the word I'm looking for? Yes, exactly. So this is the situation from a regulatory point of view, but in terms of the second point I wanted to bring is we need to partner even better with patient advocacy groups to make sure that our trials are getting into somewhat of the rounds of a patient deciding to be on clinical trials. I think right now we're doing a little bit with every single group, and the ones that are not represented is a good one. For us at GSK, yes, colorectal cancer is a priority, so we work with CCC, but head and neck is also a priority. And I don't know who to work with for head and neck. So we're kind of stuck in this no man's land of needing education and patient drawn to clinical trials, but we have no one to represent. So that's another, angle to it.
Armstrong, I'll let you, if you have any additional points, feel free to add to this conversation around some advances that we're doing to engage patients more. But then I'd also like to follow that maybe and go directly to you with a question around other aspects that you're seeing. Like we talk about artificial intelligence quite a bit in the world that I'm in. You brought it up. You've seen an opportunity. You're leveraging it. Maybe if you can speak after you address that previous question. Maybe you can speak a little bit more about what exactly are you trying to solve with your technology, with your company, and how do you think that's going to bring more investment or more clinical trials into Canada, or if that's your goal?
Certainly. And it's interesting as I heard the rest of the panels discuss this. The similar challenge that we face from a deep biological perspective, I think we also face from a clinical trial recruitment perspective is how fragmented the data is, because there isn't this one repository where someone can say, okay, if I need this, I'll go here in a nice, clean way. And I think that the absence of this central database or cohesive databases, it does increase the hurdles to then having, to speeding up the recruitment, to cutting down the lag between the desire to recruit and actually having recruitment. I think we're also at an interesting time because there's a lot more tools that are available, and there's when I look across the panelists, there's will to actually have these type of cohesive databases that can better break down, if it's a cohort that's a particular cohort of interest, if it's a particular indication of interest. I think if we can start to create the infrastructure to have this data available, then we could start to see a better uptake in terms of clinical trial recruitment, as well as the component of education. Because again, I think there's a lot of information, there's so much information. If I was to Google any one topic that we've discussed today, there's so much information, and it does cause information overload, and everybody already has so much to do. So if this infrastructure exists, it could be indication by indication, but then it aggregates to something more central. I think this could push the entire field forward. Now, with respect to artificial intelligence and its application, our take on it was, so more specifically, we take molecular biology and the components that make up human biological or physiological systems. We model these to understand them and then use that insight to predict what will be the outcome if a particular patient or a particular cohort or a particular subset of the population is put on a drug. The idea is to be more quantitative in our understanding of the differences between patients and patient groups. And by being more quantitative, we could actually point out with real data that we need more diversity, we need better representation, we need certain groups recruited to a clinical trial and not other groups. Because there's a beauty about hard data, and I am biased based on the field that I come from, but if we have real quantitative, statistically significant indications of having more diverse trials while also speeding up the rate at which they happen, I think this will push the field forward. And that's specific to the work that we do. One quick thing I think about AI is it's not going to do something that's completely out of our ability. It just shortens the timeline in which we can achieve it. So the idea is to be able to harness all the work that's been done, all the data that already exists, all the infrastructure that's there, and shorten timelines to recruitment, shorten timelines to understanding patient groups that should be put on certain drugs, and therefore to also shorten the timeline to get a drug from bench to bedside. And the one thing from a industry perspective is if we shorten timelines, we also cut down on cost. And I think everybody would agree with cutting down on cost. And so in a holistic way, by taking this approach, we're able to cut down on the long timelines, cut down on cost, and also increase the efficiency of the folks who are actually recruited into the clinical trials.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Armstrong. It's, when we were building the panel, I was thinking through and I wanted to bring in a perspective from sort of the tech side, the startup side, the quote-unquote innovator community, and say, like, what are these new technological innovations that are coming into the clinical trial environment? And yours stood out quite particularly because you are, I think, addressing some of the challenges we as a manufacturing organization, manufacturers of innovative therapies, we face, which is the blooming cost and the extreme, you can see it sort of in the graveyard of clinical trials that are happening over the last few years. It's just this level of, performance that we're trying to achieve within our clinical research, where clinical trials are just failing, along with it, all of our investments into the trials. And so these technologies that could improve the certainty or improve the predictability, that could be a game changer for the way that we design. I don't know, Bruno, if you want to add anything to that.
I agree, because speed is of essence. I think I'm not surprising that I'm saying that. It's not a surprise. So speed is an asset, efficiency. And if we can work together to make that happen, it's a win-win.
And I think that also participates to the different misperceptions that we face as well. Is that you're right, it's at two levels. We need to speed up our startup process to make sure that the sites get activated as fast as possible. With that activation, you cannot open a site for enrollment. And what is really frustrating is that spending so much time and so much budget on extended startup phase, and finding out that there will be a percentage of non-enrollers that can be significant in some therapies as well. So I think that the point we need to try to palliate, because that contributes to the, not to point out one sponsor in particular, of course, but that contributes to the misperception of the sponsor as well. I think the two main challenges that actually we will not only be discussed here today, but in 2 weeks there is a DIA Canada conference in Gatineau as well, where there will be a panel dedicated to the difficulty to put in place clinical trials in Canada too. And the two main difficulties that we have is the perception of the length, timeliness of putting in place clinical trial, particularly for contract and IRB approvals, and also the capacity for sites to enroll. And when we look at colorectal cancer, for instance, in particular, we certainly have a pool of sites that is obviously smaller than what we can observe in the US, but the pro rata of patient engagement and recruitment in Canada compared to the US, at least from what we can get from IQVIA database, for instance, is very honorable. Actually, we are performing well as well. So it's a kind of education that I was speaking about.
Let's keep it on the topic of speed per se, but I'll back up a bit to put a bit of context. I think our keynote speaker at the beginning had mentioned, and we can all agree that Canada at the global level is kind of perceived as a complex market, a complex destination. Numerous healthcare systems, across all provinces with their own sets of rules and regulations and laws, to HTAs with sometimes gaps in their appreciations of value. We also have numerous other changes in our environment that are sending signals of complexity. You have people with their international dashboard with red lights and green lights, and those are lighting up in red. But on the opposite, the quality of trialists, the quality of data, the quality of trials that are ran in Canada is renowned. That's a green light. Every time we're succeeding in those areas, that's another green line that pops. And we have to focus as an ecosystem on sending those positive signals that are a direct consequence of our capacity to be excellent at what we do. Time has been identified as the one first priority to work on when Catalis was created back then. It was, let's activate and authorize trials as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. The Canadian average is about 6 months. It's not competitive on a global scene, where the fast track evaluation service here now in Quebec that has been piloted for more than 2 years, nearly 100 trials in numerous therapeutic areas, numerous phases that has been run through that program, has a median activation time of 9.4 weeks now. And what it sends, it's a green light to global. When you get first site activated worldwide, or when you're constantly in the top 5, here's you go, another positive signal. First patient in worldwide, here you go, another positive signal coming from Canada, Quebec. So that helps building momentum in shifting the perception from a complex market destination to actually a place where science is world-class, trialists and center of excellence are renowned in their therapeutic area, but as an ecosystem as well. And you have milestones to show that the administrative red tape that has been perhaps flashing as a red dot is now turning to green. And it doesn't happen from one day to another. It happened when we had various stakeholders in the value chain sitting around the same table. We had PIs, sites, ethics director, legal directors, we had patient organization, and we had sponsors, all trying to find out that fast track way at a provincial level in a standardized fashion. So it's working. Now it's a thing of scaling it up and making it work not only for pharmaceutical trials, but academic trials as well, so that we take those learnings and transfer it across the whole clinical trial ecosystem. At least that's what we're going to be aiming to do. And with data, it's going to be tenfold what we'll be able to access in a greater capacity to accelerate the feasibility study. Well, with access what Bill number 5 allowed us to do here in Quebec, and as well, those new, I'd say the HTA level has been more and more seen that their conditional coverage that is now granted with the condition to bring real-world evidence studies 3 years down the road, so that those capacities can be unlocked with what is currently working at data level. And then you have your whole chain of value that is somehow improved and has a target of optimization that we all agree on as a collective group of various stakeholders. So lots of great things happening.
We're going to go to audience questions here, and then Bruno, you're after.
Hi, my name is Catalis. Is this working? Hi.
Can you check the switch?
There we go. Thank God the technology is not my area of expertise. So my name is Franca Cantini. Thank you very much for your perspectives. I wanted to come and bring a little bit of our perspective, which is the science perspective. I currently work as the program manager of oncology trials at St. Mary's Hospital. I have a 360-degree view of this whole industry because I've worked in pretty much every single possible role. over the years that I've been in this space, more years than I wish to say out loud. And basically, our perspective is completely different from what you're expressing right now. And I appreciate what you're expressing, and I agree that everything you said is good and is something that we should work on. However, from my perspective, as their perspective that they eloquently presented earlier, we have issues finding clinical trials. At our community center, our vision is that every patient that walks into oncology clinic should be on a clinical trial. I've been working there for 2 years. I have a matrix which says lung cancer and all the types, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, breast cancer, colorectal cancer, GI, GU. I cannot find a colorectal cancer trial. I cannot find the GU trial, prostate. I cannot find several trials. They've come to see us for some of them, where they actually spend 7 hours at our place trying to qualify us with the SEV, which is an evaluation visit. And then they come back to me months later and say, no, Global decided Canada's not going to be a site. I'm sure I'm not the only one who this happens to on a regular basis. So let's cut to the chase. And can you please tell me why Canada is not a prospective place, except maybe a rescue place, a hindsight after recruitment not going well? Could you tell me why? Is it because of the N? Is it because of the population numbers? Should we be collaborating with other countries like Australia to kind of amalgamate and have an N that's bigger, that has the same regulatory background as us? Should we be looking elsewhere? To me, this is kind of, yeah, we want to recruit, but if we don't have the trials, how are we supposed to recruit?
Great question. I don't know, manufacturer?
We're not, to be quite honest, we're not, and I think my sponsor, my pharmaceutical colleagues would agree, we're not set up all the same. And that's a good question to bring to whoever you're talking to the industry. Like if you talk to me, I can tell you that GSK Canada is a tier 1 country with GSK Global. So that means that we have first dibs on all the clinical trials. And if we can go fast enough and partner with Catalis, by the way, we have a good example of working together, but and I can guarantee that we can get you those trials because I have first dibs. If I'm not a tier 1 country, that's important information for you to know because I can tell you we will do the SQV or the work towards the SIV, study initiation vision, but you might not get the trial because we're not confirmed yet. That's on the sponsor's responsibility to let you know where you stand in the process and say, we might not get it, but we'll work towards it, and if we get 2-3 sites in Canada, then you will be set up with us. That's on the sponsor's responsibility. At least that's how I work in the clinical trial. I'm pointing over there, she's my colleague in clinical operations, but so that's how we work. Right? We can have first dib and say. Now, in terms of site qualification visit, it goes towards a full list of criteria that you must meet to meet global standard trials, which can be discussed offline, but that's how it works. So, but that's a good conversation to have with whoever the sponsor is.
But at the end of the day, just to push my question, the numbers, if we only have 3% of whatever our population is now, compared to other populations, Global is making this decision not on politics, it's on mathematics, statistically. So based on that, what can we do to improve our access to patients who need these trials? Because honestly, from a personal point of view, I have people in my family who are being treated in New York right now because there's no clinical trials here. I have others who have died because the drugs that were not available in Canada. I've been talking about this for at least 15 years, and the needle has not budged.
So, I mean, yes, we, just to finish off, and I'll pass on to my colleagues there, but we are in competition with other countries. Absolutely. When you do your feasibility for sponsor, make sure that you're thorough in your answer of, I can recruit, of course it's hypotheticals at one point, but with the volume of patients that you see currently with this situation, make sure you're really clear on this so we can get a better shot, because you are competing against Australia and Spain and the UK and Germany, not so much because they're a higher population, but these similar countries, so it's important.
Thank you.
And I do agree with what you said, Bruno, as well, but it's also our responsibility to answer your question, not to put the sole burden on the site as well. That's where we need to do more efforts in making sure that we are discussing with transparency with the sites at as soon as the site selection visit, for instance, to make sure that we set up realistic target as well. If we encourage the sites to bump up their expectation while they are not sure that they will commit to them, that will not be a success for any of us as well. And that burden doesn't have to be on the site as always. You are working already with the patients, you're already busy with your clinical practice as well. So I think that the industry, CROs and sponsors have to be a bit more transparent, as you said, with the tiering of the site as well. What are the chances for a site basically to be brought up to activations? Maybe we need to be more transparent with where we are at this time, at this stage of the trial, and what are the chances for Canada to be involved as well. And you were right with what you're saying. We working really closely with a site for which we have partnership and having a view on the pipelines of studies that we have. I was very surprised in the last 6 to 12 months actually to see the number of sponsors coming back to us saying that we are sorry, but even if 5, 6, 10 sites were selected in Canada, you cannot move forward with the country as well. And that's information that we need to understand way before and that we should share with the sites as well. So what understanding right at the beginning what can be the challenges for Canada to be involved, what are the percentage of risk actually for Canada not to be involved as well. So that's probably where we need to put more emphasis as well.
I may add a more positive spin on the math thing. I think you put the finger on something which it's a question of numbers. We're working along also with the rare disease community, or even rare conditions, rare cancers, where maths, the N is quite small. But it's the capacity to our infrastructure and our center of excellence to know exactly what that N is and to be able to create that window to attract those specific trials. When it comes to precision medicines, where it creates subsets of a given disease with specific biomarkers, Bill number 5 will allow greater data access that will make those feasibility to find the right site where there is a population that will be more subject to be recruited. And that's even true in rare disease and ultra-rare disorders, where small community centers, and we've seen it, I think it was last year in ultra-rare condition, we had a trial, a fast-track trial in Bas-du-Fleuve, in Rimouski, that was a first patient in worldwide, because it was known that there was a center of excellence there with the patients that fit the biomarkers that were required to be recruited. But if proactively, as an ecosystem, you have infrastructures and data intelligence that will now be used as a main tool to facilitate and accelerate those site selection, the chances of successes as well, and to be told yes. In a situation where the N is small, it's kind of creating a niche of excellence and expertise for the Quebec and the Canadian market that is not necessarily working against the bigger numbers, but at least you're securing some some competitive advantages on those smaller populations.
I just wanted to check if Judy or Armstrong, if you wanted to address that question at all. Otherwise, I do just want to say something before we move to Bruno.
I'm happy to speak a little bit to the question about access to clinical trials. And I know that Stuart and Rebecca were both on the agenda this morning, so they may have already talked about some of the activities that are underway to bring together solutions. The stakeholder forums that are being held currently through CCS to gather solutions to several problems, one of them being access to clinical trials for patients in Canada. And, you know, this ties into our previous conversation because in addition to you know, finding ways for patients to get to trials, what can technology and AI do to bring trials to patients? And, you know, we're looking at some of the innovative ideas that are happening under Project Moonshot in the United States right now. And anyway, I just wanted the person who asked the question, and I'm sorry it was a little bit difficult to hear, but to know that if you haven't already talked about it today, that there is work going on to gather input and work with our government and other stakeholders regarding some of these issues, certainly one of them being access to trials.
Great, thank you, Judy. The one thing I just wanted to add, you know, we're putting my hat back on, you know, previously in charge of clinical trials in Canada for Roche. It was said before this morning that we are competing on a global stage in terms of where the trials are being placed with respect to being part of a global multinational organization. And that competition, Bruno said, is fierce. It is extremely fierce. And at the end of the day, the case that we put forward in front of our clinical development teams is you said it correctly, it's a mathematics case, it's a numbers game. It is how quickly are you recruiting, what does your feasibility look like, you know, how fast can you start up a trial, are you the first site to activate, have you been the first site to activate previously, and being okay at those numbers is not good enough to compete on the global stage. Being excellent with those numbers is where we need to get to. So this is one of the things where, as we are small, we're a small market, we're a small country, we're not the smallest, but we are small. And from that perspective, what does that mean for us to be able to compete? We have to work better together. I think, you know, you look into the US and you look into the sites of the US, one site will outcompete our entire province. One site, one hospital can outcompete our entire province. And so this is the purpose of this conference, is to get everybody together across this entire nation to collaborate on improving our ability to get the performance we need from these sites so that we can get more investments in more clinical trials. We would love it, and I can probably speak for Bruno, we would love to be able to go to our global teams and say, look, you need to bring the sites to Canada because of this, that, and the other. So we're all in on this. If we want to work together to improve this, we're all in on it. Just reach out to us. Bruno.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Bruno Battistini. We are CanTrain. CanTrain is one of what was presented this morning, the ICED Clinical Trial Fund managed by CIHR, so we're the biggest one in Canada. The last 2 years, 2022-24, there were 2 reports produced by IMC, Innovative Medicine Canada, showing that we lost 50% of clinical trials in Canada over 1 decade. So my question to you, Stephan, Bruno, and Michael, and the entire panel, is what basically is wrong, what is not working with our Canadian sites, our clinical trial officers, our clinical trial units, with maybe the training of our trialists, clinical research investigator, our clinical research professional, patient partner. Is it one of the items in the equation, or there's something more?
I think it's multi-layered actually. There's not one answer to your question. It's really complex. I think On the industry side, we need to select better the sites as well. We need to make sure that we do a better feasibility process as well, a feasibility process that is not frustrating for the site as well, so that we don't come to you and always asking the same questions, basically, particularly related to your equipment, your setup, your capacity to welcome patients. Once we have done a few trials with you as a site, we know those specificities as well. So I think in the feasibility phase, we need to be a bit more granular of the exigencies of the study with the site as well, so that the feasibility process is accelerated as well. In terms of the sponsor side as well, let me know if you agree with that.
I would agree with that. What I'm hearing is that it's not the quality of the healthcare, it's not the quality of the training, it's absolutely outstanding in Canada. I'm hearing cost, I'm hearing speed, although it's not that bad. I mean, from our point of view, we're second in the world in terms of speed on trial, and only at GSK. Others it might be different, but so it's not that bad. Like, it's pretty good actually to be second. We have first trial patient dose in multiple studies at GSK Oncology, including in Halifax, smaller communities, which is great. So it's not the quality, it's not the. I don't think so. I've never heard anything about that speed cost, and sometimes R&D, ethics, contracting taking a bit more time. But apart from that, nothing on the healthcare unless you want to comment.
But it's a question of harmonization as well. As Jérôme was saying before, we are in a country, I mean, we're a federal country as well, and there's a different landscape per province too as well. And I think that what the CTO in Ontario, what you do at Catalis with the government of Quebec will be essential as well, because the way we will be working with the government to try to harmonize the ways that we work on patient medical records, for instance, will feed up the work of Armstrong as well. Armstrong will not be able to do a good work if we don't have an harmonized setup of data as well. And nowadays in Quebec, I mean, we still have sites that are working with faxes, for instance, as well. So it's maybe that, and I understand that's easy to say that it's costly for the sites, it's a logistical issue that they need to overcome as well. But that's a discussion we need to have as well, how we can harmonize better the data in order to feed platforms such as the AI platform that will be more and more used by the sponsor to decide on which countries they will implement the clinical trials at the end of the line.
Well said. I'm currently wearing my clinical trial organization hat here. I'm not from the industry or a research center, but we can be good as saving time. So that's a quicker time to market, right? But on the other hand, once the élaboration de la preuve at the clinical trial level has been done and we're packaging it for HTA, well, long delays. So we're basically losing all the time we've been saving the clinical trial level. And when I think deciders, they're looking at a market destination, they're looking at the end result, which is commercialization and access to the population. We have an agile system, even though it is complex with multi-layers. We have some exception corridors and programs that allow faster access to the result of innovation in trials. But when we're sending mixed messages with going back again with the PMPRB and then, oh, the National Pharmacare is coming, here's another list to work with. And, oh, patient d'exception, une nécessité médicale particulière, oh, that has been affected by Projet de loi 15, and we're hearing that perhaps patient d'exception is somehow targeted in the upcoming months. Well, that brings shade on all the good things we're doing as an ecosystem. So that's why we need to make sure that the whole chain is creating incentives and not necessarily two-step forward, one-step backward type of thing, because it slows us down as an innovation ecosystem. And at the end of the day, it's the patients that unfortunately are suffering from that lack of access to innovation. They have been participating to the trials, and they want to see their fellow, their semblables in their community to have access to that innovation, and or not necessarily helping ourselves when downstream we're creating delays.
That's great. So I'm just going to call it there. So please join me in thanking the panelists for providing their perspective.